Vain bikers laugh at a poor old farmer. Moments later, they're running for cover. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sprawling farmland. Rows of corn stretched as far as the eye could see, swaying gently in the breeze. At the center of it all stood Farmer Jacob, a wiry old man in his 70s with a weathered face and hands calloused from decades of hard work. His faded overalls and patched flannel shirt told the story of a life lived humbly, but his eyes still sparkled with quiet determination. Jacob had seen his fair share of tough times, but he loved his land. It was his family's legacy, passed down through generations. Even though the barn needed repairs, and the tractor often broke down, he refused to give up. This farm was his heart and soul. But on this particular afternoon, Jacob's peaceful routine was shattered by the thunderous roar of motorcycles. The sound grew louder and louder until, finally, a gang of bikers appeared over the hill, their chrome machines gleaming in the sunlight. There were at least 20 of them, clad in leather jackets and dark sunglasses, their presence as intimidating as it was disruptive. Jacob wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting as the group rode onto his property, kicking up clouds of dust. They stopped in a semicircle in front of him, their leader, a tall, burly man with a smug grin, dismounting his bike and strolling toward the farmer. "Nice place you've got here, old man," the leader said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Bet you've been working this land since before we were born." Jacob tightened his grip on the pitchfork he held, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you folks want?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Another biker, a wiry man with a bandana tied around his head, laughed. "Relax, Grandpa. We're just here to have a little fun." The group erupted into laughter, their voices echoing across the fields. One of them kicked over a bucket of tools Jacob had set aside, while another revved his bike, sending the chickens scattering in panic. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "This here's private property," he said evenly. "I'm asking you to leave." The leader smirked, crossing his arms. "Or what? You gonna chase us off with that pitchfork?" The bikers roared with laughter again, clearly enjoying themselves. Jacob glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds were beginning to gather. A storm was brewing, and not just in the sky. The bikers continued to taunt Jacob, circling him on their bikes and pretending to charge at him before swerving away at the last second. They laughed as he stood his ground, his grip on the pitchfork steady. To them, he was nothing more than an easy target, a poor old farmer who wouldn't dare fight back. "What's the matter, Grandpa?" one biker shouted. "You scared?" Another added, "Don't worry, we'll leave your crops alone. Not like they're worth much anyway." Jacob's eyes darted to the barn, where he knew his old but reliable tools were stored. He had dealt with pests on his farm before, though none quite like this. But just as he was about to speak, a loud crack of thunder echoed across the fields. The bikers looked up, startled. The dark clouds that had been on the horizon were now directly overhead, swirling ominously. The wind picked up, rustling the corn and sending a chill through the air. "Storm's coming," one of the bikers muttered. "Good," the leader said, smirking. "Maybe it'll give this old man something else to worry about." But Jacob wasn't worried. If anything, the storm seemed to embolden him. He planted the pitchfork firmly in the ground and looked the leader square in the eye. "You boys might want to find some shelter," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "This land doesn't take kindly to folks who disrespect it." The leader scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jacob didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the barn, leaving the bikers standing in the field. They watched him go, unsure whether to laugh or feel unnerved. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the bikers resumed their antics. They revved their engines, their tires tearing into the dirt and leaving deep ruts in the ground. One of them rode straight through the cornfield, crushing the stalks beneath his wheels. Jacob, now inside the barn, watched through a crack in the wooden doors. He knew the storm would intensify soon, and he had a plan. Reaching for a large lever on the wall, he pulled it down with a firm yank. There was a loud creak, followed by the sound of machinery springing to life. Outside, the bikers were too busy laughing and jeering to notice the subtle changes around them. The rain began to fall harder, turning the dirt road into a slippery mess. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the fields in flashes of brilliant white. Suddenly, a loud, mechanical clanging echoed through the air, followed by a low, rumbling growl. The bikers froze, their laughter dying in their throats. The sound was coming from the cornfield, where shadows began to move among the stalks. "What the hell is that?" one of them whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, a massive, metal contraption burst through the corn, its headlights cutting through the rain. It was an old but powerful combine harvester, its spinning blades glinting menacingly in the storm's light. Behind it, two more machines roared to life, each one moving with purpose and precision. The bikers panicked, scrambling to start their bikes and escape the onslaught of machinery. But the rain had turned the ground to mud, and their tires spun uselessly as the machines closed in. The massive combine harvester roared forward, its spinning blades kicking up mud and debris. The bikers scrambled, their laughter replaced by shouts of panic. Some revved their engines desperately, their tires spinning in the slick mud, while others abandoned their bikes entirely, running for the dirt road that led back to the highway. The leader, still seated on his gleaming black motorcycle, shouted over the chaos. "What the hell is this old man doing?" But his bravado wavered as another machine, a rusty tractor fitted with a makeshift plow, emerged from the barn, its headlights piercing through the sheets of rain. It bore down on them like an unstoppable force, the plow digging into the ground and sending chunks of dirt flying. "Move, you idiots," the leader barked, his voice tinged with fear. "Get out of here." But the field seemed alive, the storm amplifying the chaos. The wind howled through the corn, bending the stalks as if they were bowing to an unseen force. Lightning illuminated the scene in sharp, jagged flashes, casting eerie shadows across the farmland. Jacob stepped out of the barn, his silhouette framed by the flickering light. He held an old bullhorn in one hand, his voice cutting through the storm. "I warned you," he said, his tone even but laced with authority. "This land doesn't take kindly to trespassers." The bikers looked back at him, their faces pale. The machines were relentless, closing the distance with precision that seemed almost supernatural. One biker tried to veer off toward the cornfield, but the combine harvester swerved to block his path, forcing him to stop in his tracks. Did he program those things?" one of the bikers shouted, his voice trembling. Another answered, "I don't know, man, but I'm not sticking around to find out." The leader finally managed to get his bike moving, the wheels catching just enough traction to propel him forward. But as he sped down the muddy road, a deafening crack of thunder erupted overhead. A massive tree, uprooted by the storm, came crashing down across the path, blocking his escape. He skidded to a halt, nearly losing control. "Turn around," he shouted to the others. "We'll go back through the field." But the machines had them surrounded, cutting off every route of escape. The bikers, once so cocky and sure of themselves, were now trapped in a muddy battlefield, their confidence shattered. Jacob watched from a safe distance, his face calm but resolute. He hadn't programmed the machines to harm anyone, just to intimidate. Years of tinkering with his old equipment had turned the outdated farm tools into formidable machines, and he knew how to control them with precision. Still, the sight of the once arrogant bikers scrambling in fear brought a flicker of satisfaction to his eyes. "Now," Jacob said through the bullhorn, "I'm going to give you one chance, just one. Leave my land. Respect my property. And don't you dare come back." The leader glared at Jacob, his chest heaving as rain streamed down his face. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, but another flash of lightning illuminated the harvester's spinning blades, and his resolve crumbled. "All right," he shouted, throwing his hands up. "We're leaving. Just call off those machines." Jacob gave a sharp whistle, and the machines rumbled to a halt, their engines idling ominously. The bikers wasted no time, abandoning the rest of their stalled bikes and trudging through the mud on foot. The leader, still clutching his handlebars, looked back one last time, his face a mix of anger and fear. "You'll regret this, old man," he growled. Jacob raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "I don't think so. But you might." As the bikers disappeared down the road, Jacob walked over to the abandoned motorcycles. The storm began to ease, the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle. He examined the deep ruts in the soil and the flattened corn, shaking his head at the damage. Well, they won't be coming back anytime soon, he muttered to himself. But as he turned toward the barn, he noticed something glinting in the mud. Bending down, he picked up a leather wallet that one of the bikers had dropped in his haste to flee. Opening it, he found several crumpled bills, a driver's license, and a photo of a young boy standing next to the leader of the gang. Jacob stared at the photo for a long moment, his expression softening. The man who had been so arrogant and disrespectful earlier now seemed human, vulnerable. He tucked the wallet into his pocket, deciding to hold on to it for now. The next morning, as the sun rose over the farm, Jacob began the arduous task of repairing the damage. He worked methodically, his years of experience guiding him as he straightened the fence, replanted the corn, and cleaned the mud from his tools. Around midday, he heard the distant rumble of an engine. His grip tightened on his pitchfork as he turned toward the sound, ready for another confrontation. But this time, it was only one bike, a lone figure riding slowly up the dirt road. It was the leader. He stopped a few feet away from Jacob and dismounted, his posture tense but no longer aggressive. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the leader reached into his jacket and pulled out a small toolbox. I came to help, he said gruffly, avoiding Jacob's gaze. Figure it's the least I can do after what we did to your place? Jacob studied him, his expression unreadable. Then, with a nod, he extended his hand. The leader hesitated, then shook it, his grip firm. Name's Roy, the man said. Jacob, the farmer replied. Let's get to work. Over the course of the day, the two men worked side by side, repairing the fence and clearing the debris. Roy was quiet at first, but as the hours passed, he began to open up. He told Jacob about his struggles, how he'd fallen in with the biker gang after losing his job, how he felt trapped in a cycle of anger and frustration. Jacob listened without judgment, offering simple but honest words of advice. You've got a choice, Roy, he said as they finished mending the fence. You can keep running with those boys, or you can start over. Find something worth building. Roy nodded, his expression thoughtful. As he rode away that evening, he left behind not just the tools he'd brought, but a promise to change. In the weeks that followed, Jacob noticed small signs of Roy's efforts. The gang stopped returning to the area, and one day, a truck pulled up to the farm carrying supplies, a gift from Roy, along with a handwritten note. Thanks for giving me a second chance. Jacob smiled as he read the note, tucking it into his pocket alongside the photo he'd found. The farm was still his sanctuary, but now, it was also a place where even the most unlikely people could find redemption. And as the sun set over the fields, Jacob knew one thing for sure. Respect wasn't given, it was earned. And sometimes, it took a storm to remind people of that truth. The days rolled into weeks, and the farm began to heal from the chaos the bikers had brought. Jacob, as resilient as ever, worked tirelessly to restore the land to its former glory. But it wasn't just the fields that were changing, something deeper was happening. One crisp morning, as Jacob prepared to feed the chickens, he noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of his property. It was Roy, but this time, he wasn't alone. Two younger men stood behind him, their postures nervous but respectful. Jacob set down the feed bucket and walked over, his pitchfork slung over one shoulder. Morning, Roy, he said, eyeing the newcomers. Roy removed his helmet, revealing a face that looked both determined and contrite. Morning, Jacob, he replied. These are a couple of the guys from the old crew. They wanted to come and apologize. Jacob raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. Is that so? One of the younger men stepped forward, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his leather jacket. Yeah, Mr. Jacob, we were out of line. Big time. We shouldn't have come here or disrespected your land. Roy's been telling us about how you set him straight, and, well, we want to make it right. The other man chimed in. If there's any work you need done, anything at all, we'll do it. No questions asked. Jacob studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, he said, All right, follow me. Over the next few hours, Jacob put the two men to work repairing a section of the barn roof that had been damaged in the storm. He watched as they struggled at first, clearly unused to hard, honest labor, but they didn't complain. Roy stayed nearby, helping when needed and encouraging his former crew members to keep going. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the roof was as good as new, and the two young men were covered in sweat and dirt. They stood awkwardly in front of Jacob, waiting for his verdict. "You boys did good work," Jacob said finally, leaning on his pitchfork. "Now let me tell you something. Life's a lot like this farm. You get out of it what you put in. If you tear it up and leave it to rot, it won't give you anything back. But if you put in the effort, if you respect it, you'll see it grow." The young men nodded, their expressions thoughtful. "Thank you, sir," one of them said quietly. "We won't forget this." Jacob watched as they left with Roy, their bikes rumbling down the dirt road. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope that the damage they had caused was being replaced with something better. The next week, Roy returned to the farm, this time with a small group of bikers and a truckload of supplies. They brought lumber, paint, and tools, determined to repay Jacob for the trouble they had caused. Together, they spent the weekend repairing fences, painting the barn, and even building a new chicken coop. As they worked, Jacob shared stories of his life on the farm, how his father had taught him to plow a straight line, how his mother had tended to the vegetable garden, and how the land had weathered countless storms over the years. The bikers listened intently, their respect for the old farmer growing with each passing hour. By the end of the weekend, the farm looked better than it had in years. The bikers gathered around Jacob, waiting for his approval. "You boys did all right," Jacob said with a small smile. "Maybe there's hope for you yet?" Roy stepped forward, his expression earnest. "Jacob, we owe you more than just fixing up the farm. You've shown us that we don't have to keep going down the road we were on. I want to do better." "We all do." Jacob nodded, clapping Roy on the shoulder. "Then keep at it. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it's worth the effort." Word of the bikers' transformation began to spread through the small town. People who had once feared them now saw them volunteering at the local food bank, helping elderly neighbors with repairs, and organizing charity rides to raise money for community projects. The sheriff, who had long considered the bikers a nuisance, stopped by the farm one afternoon to speak with Jacob. "I don't know what you did to those boys, but it's working," he said, tipping his hat. "Haven't had a single complaint about them in weeks." Jacob chuckled, leaning on his pitchfork. "Sometimes people just need someone to show them a better way." The sheriff nodded, his respect for Jacob evident. "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you." Months later, the bikers decided to turn their rides into something bigger. They formed a group called Wheels of Change, dedicated to giving back to the communities they had once terrorized. Their first major event was a fundraising ride for struggling farmers, inspired by Jacob's resilience and the challenges he had faced. Jacob was invited as the guest of honor, and though he was reluctant to leave the farm, he eventually agreed. When he arrived at the event, he was greeted by dozens of bikers and townsfolk, all gathered to show their support. As Roy took the stage to address the crowd, he gestured for Jacob to join him. "This man right here," Roy said, his voice filled with emotion, "taught us what it means to be strong, to work hard, and to respect what really matters. None of this would have happened without him." The crowd erupted into applause as Jacob stepped forward, his weathered face flushed with surprise and gratitude. "I'm just an old farmer," he said, his voice steady. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no one's beyond redemption. You boys proved that. Now keep proving it, every day." As Jacob returned to his farm that evening, he couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. His land was thriving, his heart was full, and the once troublesome bikers had become a force for good. The storm that had swept through his fields months ago had left behind more than just damage. It had planted the seeds of something new. And as the sun set over the golden rows of corn, Jacob knew that sometimes, even the most unlikely people could find their way back to the light. All they needed was a little guidance, and a reminder that respect, like a good harvest, had to be earned. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation of Roy and his former biker gang became a staple of small-town conversation. Wheels of Change grew beyond anyone's expectations, gaining national attention for its efforts to rehabilitate troubled youth, support struggling farmers, and rebuild communities in need. The group's story was featured in newspapers and even a televised documentary, with Jacob hailed as the quiet hero who had inspired it all. But Jacob, ever humble, brushed off the attention. "I'm just an old man doing what's right," he'd say to the reporters who occasionally visited his farm. To him, the work was its own reward, the chance to see people change for the better, and to watch his farm flourish once more. One summer evening, Jacob was tending to his crops when he noticed a line of cars and motorcycles winding down the dirt road toward his property. He furrowed his brow, setting down his tools as the convoy rolled to a stop near the barn. Stepping out of the vehicles were familiar faces: Roy, his Wheels of Change crew, and dozens of townsfolk Jacob recognized from the farmer's market and the hardware store. "What's all this?" Jacob asked, his hands resting on his hips. Roy stepped forward, a wide grin on his face. "We've got a surprise for you, Jacob," he said. "You've done so much for all of us. It's time we return the favor." The crowd parted, revealing a brand new tractor adorned with a bow, as well as stacks of lumber, shingles, and fresh supplies for the farm. Jacob's jaw dropped, and for a moment he was at a loss for words. "You've been fixing up this farm piece by piece for years," Roy continued. "We thought it was about time we gave you a hand." The townsfolk cheered as Jacob walked over to the tractor, running his hand over the gleaming metal. He turned back to the crowd, his eyes misty. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "You all didn't have to do this." One of the townsfolk, an elderly woman named Mabel, stepped forward. "Oh hush, Jake. You've been the backbone of this community for as long as I can remember. It's about time we showed you how much we appreciate you." Jacob chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I reckon I won't say no to a little help." Over the next few weeks, the community came together to transform Jacob's farm. The old barn was repaired and painted a vibrant red, the fences were reinforced, and a new irrigation system was installed to ensure the crops thrived. Volunteers worked tirelessly, sharing stories and laughter as they toiled under the summer sun. For Jacob, it was a humbling experience. He had always prided himself on his independence, but seeing the outpouring of support from his neighbors reminded him of the power of community. It wasn't just about what he could do alone, it was about what they could accomplish together. As the farm began to shine with new life, Jacob found himself mentoring some of the younger volunteers, sharing his knowledge of farming and his philosophy on life. "Farming teaches you patience," he told one boy as they planted a row of seeds together. "You can't rush a good harvest. It's the same with people. Sometimes they just need time and care to grow." Meanwhile, Wheels of Change continued to grow, opening chapters in nearby towns and cities. Roy, who had once been aimless and angry, now found purpose in leading the organization. He often returned to Jacob's farm to seek advice, treating the old farmer as a mentor. "Do you think we're doing enough?" Roy asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Jacob sipped his iced tea, considering the question. "You're giving people hope, Roy. That's more than most ever do. But the real question is, are you doing it for the right reasons?" Roy nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think so. I just want to make sure no one else feels as lost as I did." "Then you're on the right track," Jacob said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just remember, it's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about planting the seeds and trusting they'll grow." A year later, Wheels of Change received national recognition for its impact. Roy was invited to speak at a leadership summit, where he shared the story of the group's origins and the man who had inspired them. "I thought I was untouchable," Roy said to the packed audience. "I thought I could do whatever I wanted and no one could stop me. But one day, I met a farmer who didn't back down. He showed me that strength isn't about how loud you are or how many people you intimidate. It's about standing firm in your values and treating others with respect." The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and afterward, many approached him to learn more about the movement. Roy made sure to emphasize Jacob's role, crediting the old farmer with teaching him and his crew the value of hard work and redemption. As Jacob entered his late 70s, the farm became quieter. The crops still grew strong, and the chickens still roamed freely, but the physical toll of years of labor began to catch up with him. One afternoon, as he rested on the porch, Roy and several members of Wheels of Change arrived with yet another surprise. "Jacob," Roy said, handing him an envelope. "We all pitched in for this. Consider it a thank you for everything you've done." Inside the envelope was the deed to a newly built community center in the heart of town. The center was named the Jacob Reynolds Center for Growth and Renewal, and it was designed to serve as a hub for mentoring programs, agricultural workshops, and community events. Jacob stared at the deed, his hands trembling. "You named it after me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve it," Roy said simply. "This whole town is better because of you." For the first time in years, Jacob felt tears welling in his eyes. He looked out at the fields he had worked his entire life and then back at the people who had become like family. "Well," he said, his voice cracking, "I reckon I've done all right, then." When Jacob passed peacefully a few years later, the entire town came together to honor his memory. The farm was preserved as a historical site, a testament to his resilience and the values he had embodied. And at the Jacob Reynolds Center for Growth and Renewal, his story was told to every new generation that walked through its doors. His legacy lived on in every crop that grew, every young person who found their way through hard work and kindness, and every person who learned that respect, like a good harvest, was earned through patience and care. And in the fields where the corn swayed gently in the breeze, it was as if Jacob's spirit was still there, quietly reminding the world, sometimes, all it takes is a storm to bring out the best in people. Following Jacob's passing, the Jacob Reynolds Center for Growth and Renewal became more than just a local community hub. It evolved into the centerpiece of a national movement. Roy, inspired by Jacob's wisdom and resilience, worked with the town and his Wheels of Change crew to establish the Jacob Reynolds Foundation. Its mission was simple yet profound: to instill the values of hard work, respect, and second chances into communities across the country. Under the foundation's umbrella, new programs were launched. Some provided training in sustainable farming methods, helping struggling farmers adopt modern practices to keep their lands productive. Others offered mentorship for at-risk youth, pairing them with local leaders who could guide them toward meaningful paths. The foundation also created a scholarship fund for young people pursuing careers in agriculture, ensuring that Jacob's dedication to the land would inspire future generations. Years later, a documentary was released titled The Farmer Who Changed Everything, chronicling Jacob's life and the transformation of the biker gang into Wheels of Change. The film featured interviews with Roy, members of the town, and even some of the bikers who had once caused chaos on Jacob's land. Jacob wasn't just a farmer, Roy said in one of his interviews. He was a teacher, a mentor, and a man who never gave up on anyone, even people like me, who probably didn't deserve his kindness. He showed us that no matter how far you've fallen, you can always climb back up if you're willing to put in the work. The documentary struck a chord with audiences nationwide, sparking a wave of interest in rural communities and the values Jacob had lived by. Donations poured into the Jacob Reynolds Foundation, allowing it to expand its reach even further. Jacob's story reminded people that even the smallest acts of courage and kindness could lead to monumental change. Over the decades, Jacob's legacy continued to ripple outward. Children who grew up in the programs funded by the foundation often spoke of the profound impact it had on their lives. One such individual was a young woman named Clara, who had been mentored at the Jacob Reynolds Center. Clara's family had struggled to make ends meet, and she often felt like her future was limited. But through the center, she learned about farming, leadership, and the importance of community. Inspired by Jacob's story, she eventually became an agricultural scientist, working to develop sustainable solutions for small farms across the country. At a conference where Clara was honored for her contributions, she spoke about the role the foundation had played in shaping her path. "I never met Jacob Reynolds," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "but his story is a part of me. He believed in the power of the land, the strength of community, and the idea that everyone deserves a second chance. Everything I've done is because someone like him believed in people like me." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, a testament to how Jacob's values continued to inspire new generations. Meanwhile, Wheels of Change evolved from a national initiative into a global movement. Roy, now a seasoned leader and advocate, worked tirelessly to bring the group's mission to new countries. Their programs adapted to the unique challenges of each region, from rehabilitating gang members in urban areas to supporting farmers in rural communities devastated by natural disasters. In one particularly impactful project, Wheels of Change partnered with an international organization to rebuild farming villages affected by a devastating hurricane. The team brought tools, resources, and volunteers to help the villagers restore their land and homes. As the project unfolded, many of the villagers were moved by the story of Jacob and how his teachings had inspired the bikers to turn their lives around. He was just one man, Roy told them, but his actions proved that even one person can make a difference. And now, it's our turn to carry that forward. Back in the small town where it all began, Jacob's farm became a symbol of resilience and hope. Declared a national landmark, it drew visitors from across the country who came to learn about the man who had turned a moment of conflict into a lifelong lesson. Guided tours took visitors through the fields, the barn, and the house, each stop accompanied by stories of Jacob's life. A small museum was built near the edge of the property, housing artifacts like Jacob's pitchfork, his handwritten journal, and the wallet he had found in the mud on the day the bikers first arrived. At the center of the museum was a plaque inscribed with Jacob's most memorable words: "Respect, like a good harvest, has to be earned." The farm became a gathering place for community events, from harvest festivals to educational workshops. Families brought their children to learn about farming, history, and the enduring power of kindness. As the years turned into centuries, Jacob's story became a timeless tale, passed down through generations. It was taught in schools as a lesson in humility, forgiveness, and the strength of standing by one's principles. His name became synonymous with resilience, and his farm a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together. In a future not so far away, a young child visiting the farm asked her mother, "Did Jacob know how important he was?" Her mother smiled, kneeling down to meet her daughter's gaze. "I think he knew he was doing the right thing. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the world." The child looked out at the golden fields of corn swaying gently in the breeze, her imagination painting a picture of the farmer who had once stood there, pitchfork in hand, unyielding in the face of adversity. Though she had never met him, she felt his presence in the land, the stories, and the lives he had touched. Because Jacob Reynolds wasn't just a farmer. He was a reminder that even the humblest among us have the power to create ripples that reach far beyond their own time. And as the sun set over the farm, its warm light bathing the fields in gold, the legacy of Jacob Reynolds carried on, alive in the hearts of all who believed in the enduring power of respect, redemption, and second chances. 100 years after Jacob Reynolds' passing, his legacy was celebrated in a grand centennial event held on his farm, now a preserved national treasure. People from across the country, and even from abroad, gathered to honor the man whose humble beginnings sparked a movement of compassion, hard work, and second chances. The farm had been meticulously maintained by the Jacob Reynolds Foundation, which had expanded to include chapters in every state and partnerships in over 50 countries. The centennial event featured speeches, performances, and exhibits that highlighted the impact of Jacob's values on individuals, communities, and entire societies. Roy, now long retired, had passed on leadership of Wheels of Change to younger generations, but his name was etched into the organization's history as a pivotal figure. His grandchildren were among the attendees, proudly sharing stories of how their grandfather had turned his life around under Jacob's guidance. The highlight of the event was the unveiling of a new monument on the farm, a life-sized bronze statue of Jacob, standing with his pitchfork in hand, his gaze resolute but kind. At the base of the statue, an inscription read, "One man can plant a seed, together, we grow a forest." By the mid-21st century, the Jacob Reynolds Foundation had become an integral part of global policy discussions. Partnering with governments, NGOs, and corporations, the foundation launched the Global Jacob Reynolds Initiative, aimed at eradicating systemic poverty through education, sustainable agriculture, and community development. The initiative's flagship program, Roots of Resilience, brought farming expertise, mentorship, and financial resources to underserved rural areas around the world. Inspired by Jacob's tireless dedication to his land, the program emphasized the importance of self-reliance and mutual support. One of the most successful projects under the initiative took place in a remote village in Africa, where farmers had been struggling with drought and soil erosion. The The foundation provided training in sustainable farming techniques, along with access to modern equipment and seeds. Within a few years, the village transformed into a thriving agricultural hub, feeding neighboring communities and even exporting crops. During a visit to the village, the program's director, a woman who had once been mentored at the Jacob Reynolds Center, spoke about the far-reaching impact of Jacob's values. "Jacob taught us that no problem is insurmountable when we work together," she said. "This village is proof that his legacy isn't bound by geography or time. His teachings belong to the world." As Jacob's story became embedded in cultural consciousness, it inspired a wave of fictionalized retellings across various mediums. Novels, plays, and films reimagined his life, exploring different facets of his character and the themes of redemption and resilience. One particularly popular adaptation was a film titled The Farmer and the Storm, which dramatized Jacob's confrontation with the bikers and the subsequent transformation of their lives. The film was a critical and commercial success, earning accolades for its powerful storytelling and inspiring message. The actor who portrayed Jacob in the film, a veteran performer, spoke during an interview about the profound effect the role had on him. "Playing Jacob made me realize the importance of standing firm in your principles, no matter the odds," he said. "His story isn't just about one man, it's about all of us, and what we can achieve when we choose kindness over fear." Jacob's teachings were integrated into educational curriculums worldwide, serving as a cornerstone for lessons on ethics, community building, and environmental stewardship. Schools organized field trips to Jacob's farm, where students learned about sustainable agriculture and the importance of respecting the land. In one such classroom, a young boy named Ethan wrote an essay about what Jacob's story meant to him. "Jacob Reynolds didn't just teach people how to farm," Ethan wrote. "He taught them how to believe in themselves and in each other. I want to grow up to be like him, not just strong, but kind." Ethan's essay won a national competition, and he was invited to read it aloud at a conference hosted by the Jacob Reynolds Foundation. His words brought tears to the eyes of the audience, a reminder that Jacob's story continued to inspire even the youngest hearts. As humanity expanded into space, the values Jacob embodied found their way to new frontiers. Colonies on Mars and beyond adopted the principles of self-reliance, community support, and respect for resources, using them as guiding tenets for sustainable living. In one Martian colony, a group of settlers established a farming cooperative named the Reynolds Collective, dedicated to cultivating crops in the harsh conditions of the Red Planet. The cooperative's leader, a descendant of one of the original Wheels of Change members, spoke about the enduring relevance of Jacob's philosophy. "Jacob Reynolds taught us that even in the face of adversity, growth is possible," she said. "Whether it's on Earth or Mars, his message remains the same: respect the land, respect each other, and never underestimate the power of hard work." Centuries after his passing, Jacob's name became synonymous with resilience, wisdom, and the transformative power of compassion. His story was told in countless languages, celebrated in art and literature, and passed down through generations as a beacon of hope. At the heart of it all was a simple truth: Jacob wasn't extraordinary because of his wealth or status. He was extraordinary because of his unwavering belief in the potential for good in every person. His actions reminded the world that even the humblest among us could create ripples that stretched across time and space. And as the fields of his farm continued to thrive under the care of those he had inspired, Jacob's legacy lived on, etched into the land, the people, and the endless possibilities he had nurtured. Because, in the end, Jacob Reynolds wasn't just a farmer. He was a cultivator of hope, a planter of second chances, and a reminder that every storm, no matter how fierce, can lead to a brighter horizon. As centuries passed, the values Jacob lived by became a cornerstone for global and interstellar societies. To honor his memory and the enduring impact of his philosophy, the Jacob Reynolds Peace Prize was established. Awarded annually, the prize recognized individuals, organizations, or movements that demonstrated exceptional dedication to fostering unity, compassion, and second chances. The inaugural recipient was a group of scientists and farmers working together to combat global hunger through innovative agricultural practices. During their acceptance speech, they highlighted Jacob's influence. Jacob Reynolds taught us that resilience isn't just about surviving adversity, it's about creating growth and opportunity in the face of it. His story reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can bloom into solutions that feed entire generations. The Peace Prize became one of the most prestigious honors in the galaxy, its recipients often referring to Jacob as the inspiration for their work. The ceremony, held annually at the Jacob Reynolds Memorial Farm, drew leaders, thinkers, and changemakers from across the stars. 1,000 years after Jacob's passing, the Jacob Reynolds Holistic Academy was established on what remained of Earth's surface, now preserved as a historical and ecological sanctuary. The Academy served as a hub for philosophical study, sustainable agricultural research, and interstellar diplomacy training, blending Jacob's values with the needs of a rapidly evolving galaxy. Students at the Academy were encouraged to spend time working on the farm itself, which had been restored to its original state as part of the campus. The experience of planting, harvesting, and caring for the land connected them to Jacob's teachings on a profound level. One student, a young diplomat named Kieran, shared her reflections in her final thesis. "Working the fields taught me more than any textbook ever could. Jacob's story isn't just about farming, it's about cultivating relationships, trust, and hope. The soil reminded me that growth takes time, but it's always worth the effort." Her thesis was later published and became required reading for leaders and policymakers across the galaxy. As humanity and its allied species continued to explore the stars, the story of Jacob Reynolds became a metaphor for the interconnectedness of all life. His legacy evolved into a symbol of the ripple effect, an idea that even the smallest actions could have far-reaching consequences. On one distant planet, settlers faced a crisis. The soil was barren, and their resources were running out. Desperate for solutions, they turned to the teachings of Jacob and the programs developed by the Jacob Reynolds Foundation. Through collaborative efforts and resilience, they managed to restore the land, building a thriving community in the process. At the heart of their settlement stood a statue of Jacob, holding a seed in one hand and a sapling in the other. Beneath it was inscribed, "Every seed holds the promise of a forest." By the 30th century, the Reynolds Collective, a network of communities, organizations, and educational institutions inspired by Jacob's philosophy, spanned hundreds of planets and colonies. These collectives acted as safe havens for those seeking redemption, guidance, or simply a place to start anew. One such collective on a moon orbiting a distant star became famous for its innovative approach to conflict resolution. When two rival factions sought to claim the moon's resources, the collective's leaders invoked Jacob's principles, mediating a peaceful agreement that benefited both sides. In a recorded statement, the leaders said, "Jacob Reynolds taught us that every storm is an opportunity for growth." Today, we honor his legacy by ensuring that this moon becomes a place of unity, not division. As time stretched into millennia, Jacob's legacy became less about one man and more about a universal truth, that hope, resilience, and compassion were the cornerstones of any thriving civilization. His story continued to be told, adapted for new contexts and challenges, but the core message remained unchanged. In a future so distant that Earth itself had become a memory preserved in holograms and archives, a group of explorers aboard a generational starship uncovered a digital record of Jacob's life. Though they had never heard his name before, they were captivated by his story, finding parallels to their own struggles in the vast unknown of space. One of the explorers, a historian, remarked, "Even after all this time, his story resonates. It's as if Jacob understood something timeless, something that connects all of us, no matter where or when we are." And so, Jacob's ripples continued, stretching across the cosmos and into the hearts of beings who could scarcely imagine the quiet farmer who had started it all. Though the storms of his life had long since passed, Jacob Reynolds' impact was eternal. His farm became more than a place. It became a symbol, a reminder that every small act of courage, kindness, and integrity could grow into something far greater than anyone could imagine. And as the stars turned and civilizations rose and fell, one truth remained constant. Jacob Reynolds had planted a seed of hope, and the harvest would last forever.